One of the things that I've missed most about being in West Michigan with my interfaith work was being able to come visit C3. So I'm so glad to have been invited back to share a little bit of what I've been thinking about and learning in divinity school and in my new context. And as you can imagine, divinity school is chock full of conversations on the good life. While most people think of divinity school or might think of divinity school as a training ground for pastors, my program and many programs like mine is actually much more expansive than that. It's more about building, and it's a training ground for building an ethically and morally grounded vocational life. And so naturally, it was hard for me to think about just one part of the good life to talk about today. It's a very big question. But removing myself from the heady intellectual space of graduate school, one theme in particular has been popping up for me. And it's something that I think has quite a lot to do with the good life. And that idea is friendship. The first time that I considered the question of the good life was my first year in college, when I took a class on happiness. One of the books that we read was Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer, a true story about Chris McCandless. Chris was a young man who refused the wealth of his parents, gave away all of his savings, got rid of all of his possessions, and set out on a journey into the Alaskan wilderness. And in the wild, living off the land, one day Chris accidentally ate a poisonous plant that ended up causing him to face his imminent death. And in the last moments of his life, moments spent alone, isolated from society and from family, the choice that he made, he scribbles notes in the margins of a book that he was reading. And the words he wrote in those last moments of his life were, "Happiness is only real when shared." Whether intentionally or not, I think this very quote has shaped much of my own approach in attempting the good life. Looking back, I see that relationships are at the core of all of the work I've engaged in. In college, in Model United Nations, it was relationships that created coalitions and shaped policy proposals. In my interfaith work, relationships transcended differences in theology and in tradition. And in my media and radio work, relationships enriched and deepened the conversations and interviews we were able to have. And as I've mentioned, as you know, this past summer, I left Grand Rapids and moved to Boston to study at Harvard Divinity School. And alongside my classes, I now work with the How We Gather team, which includes Casper ter Kuile, Angie Thurston, and Sue Phillips, who are the Ministry Innovation Fellows at Harvard Divinity School. Their work began with the initial report, which I've shared in this space as well, called How We Gather. And it looks at where non-religious and unaffiliated millennials are building community once they leave religious institutions behind. The communities they study in this report were places like the Sanctuaries, which is a multiracial, multi-religious arts and social change community in Washington, D.C., the Dinner Party, a monthly dinner held at people's homes for those experiencing the loss of a parent, and even organizations like SoulCycle and CrossFit, organizations with an evangelical zeal that focus on personal and communal transformation through fitness. And so over these past 4 years, How We Gather has been convening the leaders of these communities and learning about this emerging world of spiritual community building today, the world that's happening outside of religious institutions. The newest report they published just this past week explores that new, yet actually very old work of caring for souls. The Care of Souls report today names the emerging religious landscape that we see and the roles that are required for the work moving forward. In Care of Souls, Casper, Angie, and Sue suggest that the task now is to bridge the ancient and the emergent, and to discover how to apply wisdom to new generations. Their central question, and the thrust of my own work as well alongside them, is how do we care for souls in the 21st century and beyond? I share all of this to introduce the context from which now I am entering into this question of the good life. Beginning as a college freshman, hearing the words that happiness is only real when shared, to now in a calling centered on community and care, there seems to be a thread that suggests what my own good life has been about. and what it has been rooted in. Friendship as a spiritual and even revolutionary practice. It's only in this past year that I really started to take friendship as a practice seriously. After first noticing it as a powerful presence in my own community building, I started noticing it discussed in theological and philosophical practices and texts that I was reading. And none of this is new or radical. I think it's something that we all feel to be true in our bones. But to speak for myself at least, I often forget. I forget the transformation that's possible through deep friendship. And in this hyper-individualized society, we're all taught, conditioned, and expected, I think, to make our own selves our own bottom line. And so the reason I chose to talk about friendship today is because I think friendship tends to be something that we don't take seriously enough, or something that we sell short, lacking in appreciation of its power. After all, while we're more connected digitally than ever before, we have thousands of Facebook friends or Twitter followers at our fingertips, we're actually more isolated than ever before. In recent decades, researchers have discovered that loneliness left untreated is not just psychologically painful, but it actually has serious medical consequences as well. Studies have linked loneliness and social isolation to heart disease, cancer, depression, diabetes, and suicide. Isolation has become a public health epidemic in the modern world. And so responding to this epidemic of loneliness and crisis of isolation, and looking to a vision of the good life for the 21st century, what I want to share are several teachings on the role of friendship. Through these insights from various communities, texts, theologies, and philosophies, I hope to begin to uncover this tradition of friendship as something to embrace as a spiritual and revolutionary practice. And there are 6 short examples of what this looks like, beginning with my own story. About 1 year ago, along with the Dominican Sisters of Grand Rapids, we started gatherings called Nuns and Nuns, now called Sisters and Seekers, which is a meeting of Catholic women religious, Catholic nuns, and non-religious millennials. Many unexpected friendships immediately flourished from that space, and the intergenerational nature of these friendships made them even more unique. These friendships between largely 20-somethings and 70-somethings rooted the group in a larger sense of time and a deeper sense of hope. They swapped strategies for change and tools for resilience. They shared histories of oppression and stories of liberation. And after gathering about twice a month since last April until today, one sister even said that the highlight of her year of 2017 was building friendships through this unlikely community. Nuns and Nuns taught me that friendship has the ability to cross social barriers and transform us at any age. And it seems particularly true among women. Friendship can transform ourselves individually and in community. In Sister Joan Chittister's book, The Friendship of Women, The Hidden Tradition of the Bible, the feminist Benedictine nun reclaims a history of feminine friendships that have been lost to the patriarchal storytellers through the ages. What I learned from Joan is that friendship is a spiritual resource to tap into for strength, support, and empowerment, particularly for women who have been shut out of traditional forms of power, of political power. Joan claims friendship not just as a public alliance of the court and castle, but as a personal tradition of spiritual friendship. She follows in the tradition of St. Augustine and believes that human relationships are the ground of growth. However, this transformative, vulnerable friendship shows up not just in women's lives. One of my favorite examples of deep friendship is between 2 Irish poets, David Whyte and the late John O'Donohue, who have frequently talked about their friendship and dedicated their poems to one another. John O'Donohue, who died in 2008, wrote a book based on the Celtic idea of Anam Cara, translating to soul friend. As he writes, in the early Celtic church, a person who acted as a teacher, companion, or spiritual guide was called an Anam Cara. It originally referred to someone to whom you confessed, revealing the hidden intimacies of your life. Revealing the hidden intimacies. With the Anam Cara, you could share your innermost self, your mind, and your heart. This friendship was an act of recognition and of belonging. When you had an Anam Cara, your friendship cut across all convention, morality, and category. You were joined in an ancient and eternal way with the friend of your soul. Friendship for these poets, then, is a purposeful presence. It's an intentional integrity toward one another. In O'Donohue's words, a friend is a loved one who awakens your life in order to free the wild possibilities within you. A friend is a loved one who awakens your life in order to free the wild possibilities within you. It is also the nature of friendships across category, across difference, that has a transformative power on people, not just personally, but in their political lives. Whether it's differences across religious conviction or different generations, the practice of building friendship can lead to what philosopher Hannah Arendt called thinking without banisters. Arendt, a 20th century philosopher, believed that friendship had political relevance and importance. The essence of friendship existed for her in discourse, a discourse that through its practice the world is rendered humane. Friendship, then, for Arendt, has the power to rehumanize us to one another and to those unlike us, liberating us to think without banisters which too often divide us. In a new book entitled Joyful Militancy, Building Thriving Resistance in Toxic Times, writers Nick Montgomery and Carla Bergman view friendship as the root of freedom. They remind us that friend and free in English come from the same Indo-European root, which conveys the idea of a shared power that grows. Being free and having ties was one and the same thing. I am free because I have ties. I am free because I am linked to a reality greater than me. Embracing this relational interdependency of friendship, then, is a revolutionary method of freedom. It is a freedom that releases us from the capitalist and profit-driven world and recenters us on one another and the ways in which we can mutually support each other outside of systems. In Joyful Militancy, friendship is a way to resist, a path for freedom, and a tool for collective liberation. One last example. Friendship is a powerful element in many faith communities as well. The community of Sant'Egidio is a community that centers its entire theology on friendship. Sant'Egidio is a lay Catholic community founded in Rome exactly 50 years ago, and today holds a global presence in 73 countries with over 60,000 members, dedicated to prayer, dialogue, and peace. This global movement started with a group of friends from high school in 1968 who were inspired by their faith to live into the gospel in radical countercultural ways. Living the gospel for them meant building friendships with the poor and the marginalized, and letting all ministries and actions follow from those friendships. In each community and in each country now, Sant'Egidio members build friendships first, and then let that friendship determine what accompaniment and advocacy looks like. Sant'Egidio sees the practice of faith as a call to friendship, a friendship that Jesus modeled as a transformational path of peace. They believe that a glimpse of the kingdom can be born through prayer and friendship with the poor. Through these examples, we can see the personal, communal, and political transformation possible through friendship. The intergenerational nature in Nuns and Nuns, the spiritual friendship of women named by Sister Joan Chittister, the soul friend connection articulated by poet John O'Donohue, the practice of friendship as rehumanizing us to one another, taught by Hannah Arendt, the interdependency of friendship as a path to freedom for the authors of Joyful Militancy, and the Sant'Egidio model, which offers friendship as the foundation for living lives of faith committed to peace and justice. In each of these cases, friendship leads to resilience and sustenance, resistance and freedom, and faith and advocacy. Friendship is the process and the end, the method and the goals. From faith leaders and philosophers to poets and activists, friendship plays a central role in their personal and their public lives. Friendship is not only what sustains us, it's what liberates us. Friendship not only inspires us, but it transforms us. And as we today, and this month, ask what the good life looks like, what caring for souls in the 21st century means to our communities, what answer does friendship provide? How can the wisdom of friendship from both ancient and emergent sources respond to today's needs? The poet John O'Donohue, in one of his last interviews given before his death, reminded us that friendship is vital to our whole spirit, to our being, our character, our mind, and our health. But so many of us, he says, forget and don't spend enough time with the friendships in our lives. I know certainly for myself, I am guilty of this. Too often, I am caught up living a productive life rather than a good life. I usually measure my days by how many things I cross off my to-do list rather than how many conversations I had with friends. My friends are my estate, wrote Emily Dickinson. In other words, friends are the wealth that we will have at the end of our lives. They are the treasure we accrue. What if we all measured our life this way, instead of by the hours worked or emails sent or money earned? I think if we remember friendship at the beginnings and ends of our days, the starts and closes of our weeks, we could all get a deeper sense of the good life, or at least the good life that's possible through the shared life. And to end with the words of Sister Joan Chittister, she says, "It is surely then of the highest spiritual order to celebrate the sacrament of friendship." Thank you.